DeVore acted as an intel officer specializing in Russian tactics for 24 years. He joins me now. Supposedly, they have buried the hatchet. Supposedly, Prigozhin is just going to take his forces back into Ukraine or perhaps Belarus, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. Do you believe that?
No, I don't, John. I don't at all. Look, agreements in Russia have a very short half-life. Written agreements probably slightly more than verbal agreements. Both men, both Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin, need to be watching their backs right now. This has not been good for Russia. It's not been good for Putin's kleptocracy. This weakens him in the eyes of Russians. It weakens him in the eyes of the world, especially in places like the People's Republic of China. This has not been a good outcome for Russia. They've had a large-scale armed revolt. And in Ukraine, this has implications for Russia's occupation of Ukraine as well. You're going to see significant disruption of command and control channels, a lot of distrust between higher and lower echelons. You're going to see logistics disrupted for several days. This will allow the Ukrainians probably to improve their prospects with the ongoing counteroffensive, by which, by the way, they have not committed their main force in that effort.
Vladimir Putin was not a military leader, ever. He was an FSB guy, or a GRU, I guess they called it at the time. He was a spy. Does this show his weakness, I guess, his weak spot in trying to command a military and, maintain this special military operation, as he calls it?
Yeah, so I think the big challenge with the type of regime that you see in Russia right now is that it's very difficult to develop a professionalized military, because what ends up happening is everyone's trying to make a buck. Everyone's looking out for themselves. And if you end up with a general officer who's competent and starts to win battles, they become a threat to people like Vladimir Putin, who, as you pointed out, does not have military experience. He was, in fact, a spy for the KGB. And so, as a result, he surrounded himself with individuals who are not a threat to him and, by and large, are not particularly adept at military operations. And you saw this with the invasion of Ukraine last year, when they invaded while it was still muddy. You had a very mild winter. And as a result, they were unable to logistically sustain their initial assault. They were very overambitious in their expectations to topple the regime in Kyiv, and they failed. And as a result of the failure, they've now been in this terrible slugfest with Ukraine far longer than they ever anticipated.
Sergei Shoigu, the army leader, he's obviously Putin's loyalist. He, too, did not have a great deal of military experience. Isn't that correct? Would you expect that he does survive this attempt, I guess, at a coup by Prigozhin?
Yeah, this is the big question, right? Because Prigozhin definitely laid down the markers that not only did he want the defense minister gone, but he also wanted the chief of the general staff gone as well. And so far, perhaps to save face, the Kremlin is saying that there was no deal, that neither men are going anywhere. Now, let's see what happens in the next 24 to 48 hours. Every day that goes by is another day that you may see people somehow tragically falling out of high windows, out of apartment buildings, or maybe shooting themselves in the head several times. This is a very violent and right now a very chaotic and unstable regime. And we've seen the proof of that in a mercenary force managing to very quickly drive north to the very outskirts of Moscow and not be stopped, because all of the major military assets that Russia possesses right now are committed to the fight in Ukraine. So you had a very small and lightly armored mercenary force that managed to batter its way through a good portion of Russia in the last 24 hours.
Yevgeny Prigozhin said publicly that the invasion of Ukraine was a mistake, but he also said that Putin was lied to by his military leaders. That seemed to be an out for Putin. It seemed to be an offering of an out for Putin. But Putin is remaining loyal to those two men, at least for now.
Right. So people around Putin were telling Putin what Putin wanted to hear. Putin has developed this entire narrative, this kind of mythology about Ukraine, that it's not a real country, that it's never really been separate from Russia, that they're really just one people. And anyone around Putin knew that that was what Putin wanted to hear. And so all Prigozhin was saying was the truth about this particular matter. And by the way, let's not be mistaken. Both Prigozhin and Putin are bloodthirsty and have a lot of blood on their hands. Both men do. And just because in this case one man was telling the truth about the operation in Ukraine does not somehow imbue him with any angelic features. That said, a lot of what Prigozhin said did get out to the general Russian public. And I can't imagine that it helps the morale of the Russian conscripts fighting the Ukrainians on Ukrainian soil against an army that, frankly, has far better morale and training than the Russians do at the moment. So I think that this will have ramifications, positive ramifications for Ukraine and its ongoing counteroffensive. And certainly it didn't help.
It's going to be fascinating to see which of those two men, Prigozhin or Putin, is still standing in a month. Lieutenant Colonel Chuck DeVore, thanks very much.
Thank you.